Hello, welcome back. And if you're new to my channel, it's nice to meet you. My name is Suzanne. I'm a certified astrologer, a self-professed astrology geek. I study all kinds of astrology, but I specialize in evolutionary astrology, horary astrology, and a modality called human design. If you want to find out more about my work, you can visit me at gohigherfrequency.com. Today, I'm going to be talking about the full moon in Libra, which is about cyclical integration and indecision in times of crisis. This full moon is related to the new moon eclipse we had in October 2023. Do you remember seeing anything during that eclipse period? And then if you think back to July 2024, that was the opening square to that new moon eclipse. So during an opening square, we usually experience some kind of stress with what we're trying to manifest out into the world. And this full moon is a culmination of that time period. It's where we try to give a social context to what we started during the new moon eclipse. It's what we're projecting out into the world, and we're seeing it with new eyes. But if we think about cycles as 7-year time increments, this one began in 2018. You remember your life during this time period. Life has clearly changed, and yet, as you can see from these photos, the themes are still very present. It seems to me that everything has changed, and yet nothing has. Surreal, isn't it? Of course, everything shifted to a magnificent degree after COVID. And I got a jump start because of my planetary timing. And thank God, because I have a very slow Pisces moon square my nodes, so it takes me a lot longer to transition than some people. I started my Uranus opposition in 2018. I moved across the country attempting to transition to a new, more relaxed way of life after seriously burning out in New York City. I felt like my life was in shambles, and I was disillusioned with my work. I needed something higher to devote my time to. Now, just after my Chiron return, I am experiencing this full moon illumination across my ascendant axis with Mars in my 10th house. In October of 2023, I had finally had enough with my marketing consultant gig and decided to exit. After devoting most of my free time to studying astrology for 4 years, I had decided it was time to spread my wings and to attempt to turn it into something I could devote myself fully to. In July, I finally passed my certification exam, which was exceedingly difficult for me as it was very technical. I had to learn how to draw up a chart by hand with no computer aiding me, just calculators. And I'm horrible at math. As far as tests go, it was one of the hardest I've had to take. But it was an important milestone for me as I had struggled with my teacher during my 2-year intensive program for evolutionary astrology. I had decided to exit that program without help from my teacher to get certified. So here I am, embracing the fact that my purpose is to share my creative energy with you. What tomorrow holds, I cannot know. But this is where I'm meant to be right now at this moment. My life has completely transformed since that initial jump into the unknown. It was sort of like the Aries eclipse we just had. It was time, and I jumped, and I had no idea what would unfold in front of me. And a lot has happened since then. And it has been very difficult. And now I see the world with new eyes. I could not go back even if I wanted to. So in that way, letting go is much easier for me. How about you? I'd love to hear your story. From a political lens, if you remember, 7 years ago, Trump was in office for the first time, and he had just instituted his first round of tariffs on China. This new presidential election began in earnest in October 2023, and July was near the time Trump got shot at a rally. Now, if we zoom out to the wider world, the Gaza-Israeli clashes really began on November 11th, 2018, when a botched Israeli covert operation in the southern Gaza Strip killed 7 Palestinian militants and 1 Israeli soldier. And even though the Russia-Ukrainian war started in 2014, when Russia occupied and annexed Crimea from Ukraine, it then supported Russian paramilitaries who began a war in the eastern Donbas region against Ukraine's military. And in 2018, Ukraine declared the region to be occupied by Russia. Fires were going on in California in 2018. And of course, we were experiencing climate change, and it was accelerating a lot quicker than we had imagined. Now, this full moon is about the maturation of this cycle. It's about acknowledging and attempting to adapt to the instability of change. It's about learning that we can only avoid failing as a species if we all progress together. The more we are all involved, the healthier it's going to be for all of us. We are interdependent. And some of us already recognize this, but some of us have to learn this lesson the hard way. So we just had this new moon eclipse in Aries. But remember, we were given one last look back before we took the leap forward. Now, with this full moon, we're asked to release that which we can no longer hold on to. We cannot go back. It's time to accept that we can no longer hold on to old, dying forms. We must fight for something new, something in tune with our most cherished values. I'm going to attempt to put a positive spin on what's happening because we desperately need to be empowered positively. We are in times of great change and instability. Our world is rapidly changing. Our parties are changing. And we need to figure out how to adapt to these changes because they are happening. We can't escape that. We need to evolve the ways that we approach our government and our institutions to better support us during these changes. If you zoom out and you disregard the actions of the specific administration, we desperately needed a new system. We may benefit from starting over, maybe not in the ways that this administration is doing things, but with their destruction, there's an opportunity for us to build something brand new that works better for everyone. So whatever happens during this time period, this idea is something we must hold on to survive it. Sometimes you have to take a wild leap of faith to move forward. Even if the solution that's being offered is monumentally crazy, sometimes you have little choice but to accept it. It might surprise you where it takes us. Perhaps it's not where you thought we'd end up. Perhaps it wasn't even the intention. It just happened by accident. And maybe the initial destruction isn't worth it, but where we end up is much better than what we could have possibly imagined when we took that leap. Now, maybe that's a wild fairy tale. These kinds of miracles can happen if we keep our minds and hearts open for opportunities that make themselves available to us during these times of change. Our world is changing, people are changing, and how we interact is changing. We have to learn new ways to thrive and to help others thrive. This full moon is on the cardinal axis. So it's Libra and Aries, which is Venus and Mars. And then the squares to that axis are Capricorn and Cancer, or Moon and Saturn. So this is about yin and yang and mother and father. How do we hold space for each other without losing ourselves in the process? This has always been my dilemma as a Libra rising. We need the squares and oppositions to find balance between the extremes. So we need each and every one of us to fill in the gaps to complete the circle. Progress can only be made when everyone is involved in that progress. So the good news is that Mars is coming back from out of bounds on the 7th of April. before this full moon. Now, it just happens to be that Trump is going to be instituting the Make America Great Liberation Day of tariffs on April 4th. And then the day after, there's going to be a nationalized protest. And this was organized before these tariffs were announced, which was just yesterday. I'm filming this on April 3rd. And so I don't know what's going to happen between that time period, but I'm guessing that some of the things that are happening are going to pull this administration back from going all out crazy as it has been. If you remember January's full moon in Cancer, it was also at this 23 degrees and it was in square Capricorn, Cancer to this full moon that we're having in Libra and Aries. And this was the beginning of Mars going out of bounds, but it was retrograde. It was still at this 27 degrees of Cancer. And it was with the moon, which was also out of bounds. Now, this started the process of Doge coming in and obliterating our agencies. And now there's news that he's stepping down finally, thankfully. Now, it makes sense to me that he was Mars out of bounds since he's a Cancer and his Mercury is out of bounds and it's rising in his chart on his ascendant. And he has Mars on his North Node in Aquarius. Now, I explored his and Trump's partnership together in my Human Design channel. I'll link it below in case you're interested. During that exploration, I saw that he can really leave a lot of damage because of this Mars on his North Node. Now, it's pretty apparent to everybody that that's happening. What they want to start is something new, but his actions are leaving a very negative mark on that something new, as we all can see. I think a lot of people are starting to realize that there are consequences, negative consequences to what's happening. And if you see this, and Neptune is on the North Node, and Neptune is at that 27 degrees of Pisces. And we'll go back to the other chart, but you'll see that the North Node is now on that 27 degrees of Pisces. And what that degree from a Sabian standpoint means is we reap what we sow. This is all about karma, right? What people don't understand about karma, it's not good or bad. It's just that our actions have consequences. And sometimes they're not directly linear. Sometimes they happen a long time later. Sometimes they happen immediately. And sometimes you don't see them happening directly to the person that caused those actions, but somebody is getting consequences from those actions. And the world in general, what we put out into the world has consequences. And those consequences can come back to haunt us at some point, and we can't always see that. And that's Neptune, unfortunately. Neptune can be both good and bad. It's not moralistic here. Sometimes it really shades and diverts our attention to what's really going to happen later for a higher purpose. And we don't see that higher purpose while it's happening. And sometimes that higher purpose has negative consequences for some people. But it's about cycles and it's about change and it's about where we're at as humanity. And sometimes people are instruments toward that change for a higher purpose that we do not always understand. During the time that I made that leap to Texas first, before I had to take another leap across the country, I was struggling with alcohol. And I had leaned on alcohol for some time because I needed it. I felt to manage my anxiety, the pressure that I felt to have to perform and to work around the clock at my old career. And I knew that I had a problem and I was trying to address it. And I had been searching for something spiritual, but I was going back and forth. And I made a last trip to New York City in 2019 where I had gotten drunk and I did something very uncharacteristic of me. And it was what you will call hitting rock bottom. And it was that moment when I decided I could no longer drink alcohol. And Neptune was on my Venus. It was past my Neptune square, but Venus is considered still in square to Neptune. Neptune's on my North Node. And at the time, I had no idea why I had done this, but I'm, thankful in a way, although it destroyed a relationship. I'm thankful that it happened because it helped me really see that I was doing serious damage. I wasn't facing what I really needed to face in my life, and I was acting out based on that. So that's kind of how Neptune works. You don't really see it until the fog is lifted. And then you look back and you think, oh God, thank God that happened. Sometimes there's trauma that's inflicted. And, Uranian is traumatic experiences because sometimes people need to really move forward. They need that memory. They need that. Neptune is all about gaining immunity, is what my teacher used to call it, gaining immunity. And sometimes we have to go through really rough stages of sickness to gain that immunity. So I wanted to point out the midheaven of this chart, which is located in Washington, D.C. It's at the 7 degrees of Leo. And 7 degrees is related to the Libra degree. So it's very oriented toward our relationships. And this is also on that Libra axis. So we know it's about our relationships. It's ruled by Venus in retrograde in Pisces. We're examining and trying to figure out creative new ways to deal with some of our partnerships. But I thought it was interesting that the Sabian of this 7 degrees Leo is called a communist activist spreading his revolutionary ideals. So what's happening with that? 7 degrees is repeated. It's also going to be in our next new moon chart, which is in Taurus, which is ruled by Venus. So after this full moon, Venus will go direct, and then we'll have a new moon that's ruled by Venus. And so at that time, we'll see what shakes out, I believe, with our new partnerships, our new allies, where we're headed. We'll see a little bit more clearly what's happening. But let's look at the new moon eclipse chart really quickly. So as you can see in this new moon eclipse chart, which is also located in Washington, D.C., we have 7 degrees of Scorpio. And 7 degrees of Scorpio is ironic because it's about peace through stillness. It's called a calm lake bathed in moonlight. But as you can see, Mars is right on the midheaven here. It's in the 9th house side. It's right next to the South Node, and it's about our allies at war. Several of them were at war, and it's headed toward the 3rd house, which is conjunct Chiron. And as you can see, our full moon has Chiron connected to the sun. And now it's being illuminated by these new tariffs that have gone out. So whatever wounds that we felt in our partnerships is being clearly illuminated now. We're seeing that shadow very clearly with the black moon Lilith on the moon there. So it's about our values and it's about money and how we're trying to figure out ways to restructure what some people feel is our entitlement to money. And Venus in the last chart was in the 8th house. So it's about this exchange between what we're getting from our partners versus what we want for ourselves. And I also wanted to point out that Hygeia is here in the last chart. It was in the 1st house in Aquarius, and Hygeia is about health. It's in Aquarius. So what's going on with our health for our collective identity in the US? And now it's moved closer to Uranus, the co-ruler of Aquarius, which is also ruled by Venus. And it's in the 4th house. So we're coming into terms with the health of our foundations. And our foundations are being shook up. And Trump is the Uranian here. It's being shook up, and we're going to have to face the health of our institutions, our foundation of this very country. Okay, so a lot can happen before this full moon. It is a very tense full moon. And like I said, there's a national protest happening on the 5th. I would encourage you, if you feel compelled, to join others to protest what you believe we should keep solid about the US. And if you're not going to go out and protest, figure out what your values are and how you can respond in this moment to encourage others to respond in their own way, to figure out what's very vital for our country. What do we want to keep versus what do we want to throw away? It's going to be a rocky month. We have the Saturn North Node conjunction, along with the Mars and Pluto opposition later in the month before this next new moon in Taurus. This next new moon in Taurus will be in the 8th house of the Washington, D.C. chart. So I think we'll know much more clearer about where we're headed financially, hopefully with our partnerships. But until then, I encourage you to take action where you feel most compelled to take action. I think really focusing your energy toward the places that you feel will benefit the most is important. So that's it for me. I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you next time.